Syracuse football is a sleeper to make the college football playoff next season? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, a national expert, Tom Fornelli from CBS Sports, calls Syracuse football a sleeper to make the college football playoff in 2024. So we're going to go over his reasons as to why he believes that. And then I'm going to give you my take on it and reasonable expectations for Syracuse football next season. So once again, CBS Sports' Tom Fornelli calls Syracuse football a sleeper candidate to make the college football playoff in 2024. He cited 4 reasons, but before we get to the 4 reasons, I want to quickly explain how the college football playoff is going to work for next year, because it's a little bit different than in years past, and there's a reason why people are optimistic about this upcoming season, about their chances of making the playoff, because it's a little different. So, in years past, it was 4 teams. That was after it used to just be 2 teams. And before that, it was 1 team. It used to be 4 teams, and it was judged on an arbitrary process. There was no way to really automatically qualify for it. The committee would just take the 4 best teams they deemed, or the 4 with the best resume, whatever you want to call it, but they would only take 4. Okay, they would only take 4 teams. Next year, it's going to be 12. And there's only 5 automatic qualifiers. So you got the Big 4, Power 4 conference champions, right? So the ACC is included in that, the Big 12, and then, of course, you got the top dogs in the SEC and the Big 10. So the conference winners get an automatic bid, and there will be, I believe, 1 Group of 5 team. The highest ranked Group of 5 team will also get into the college football playoff for next season. So then after that, there's 7 additional wild card spots for a total of 12 teams in the college football playoff next season. So that's why really there is a discussion about Syracuse football having a chance to make the playoff, because even though I am a Syracuse homer, if it was only 4 teams, there's no chance. 0 chance they would have made it. But now that it's 12, that's why they're now a sleeper candidate. So here are the 4 reasons why Tom Fornelli calls Syracuse football a sleeper. I'm going to dive into them. Number 1, he said an upgrade at quarterback with McCord over Shrader. I happen to agree with him on that. While I do believe that Garrett Shrader was a better quarterback than we think, Kyle McCord is an upgrade over him. Plain and simple. He is. Garrett Shrader was solid. He had a floor. He had a ceiling. He can guide you to a bowl game, which is respectable in college football. Getting to a bowl game, 2 bowl games in 3 years is pretty good. But he was never going to take you to that next tier. And Kyle McCord is someone who I believe next season can take them to the next tier. So that can mean from just a 6-7 win bowl team to perhaps 8 to 9 wins. That's the difference between Kyle McCord and Garrett Shrader. He can buy you 1 to 2, maybe even 3 more wins than you otherwise would have had. So I agree with him. Kyle McCord is definitely an upgrade over Garrett Shrader, and upgrading at quarterback is going to improve your team. Number 2, he cited a deeper wide receiver room, particularly with the upgrades of, or the additions in the transfer portal of Justus, Ross-Simmons, and Zeed Haynes. He didn't mention Jackson Meeks in the article, but Jackson Meeks is there as well. We talked about the wide receiver room a few days ago on this podcast. I think it is deeper. It is much improved. There's better high-end talent as well, because the guys that were starting last season that are still there are going to have to fight to get on the field because of all the guys that they added, like a Jackson Meeks and a Justus, Ross-Simmons, and a Zeed Haynes. Those might be the 3 best receivers on the team for next season, all of them coming from the transfer portal. So I do agree with Tom Fornelli on that Syracuse football has upgraded the wide receiver room, upgraded the quarterback room. He then mentioned Oronde Gadsden coming back from injury, and LaQuint Allen still being there certainly helps round out the weaponry, so to speak. I think Oronde Gadsden is the best weapon on the team, as well as, well, you'll have to tune in for Poll Friday tomorrow for who I think is the best player on the team right now. But regardless, Oronde Gadsden, one of the best on the team. And LaQuint Allen, a 1,000-yard back in a Power 4 conference, is really solid. And finally, the schedule. The friendly schedule that we all are pretty much aware of by now. Tom Fornelli mentioned that at NC State and Miami are probably the toughest games on Syracuse's schedule. Can't really argue against that. Miami at home, I think, is the toughest out of all of them, just because while Miami underachieves every single year, their athletes are really good, right? They get NFL prospects. They get the best high school recruits. They get really solid transfers in the portal. They just never win, really, because, well, they have a terrible head coach. Mario Cristobal stinks as a head coach. But regardless, how Syracuse is going to match up, particularly in the trenches against Miami, could be a real concern. That's why I think it's the hardest game on the schedule. And then at NC State is a tough one too. But with all that being said, ESPN recently released who they think has the easiest schedules in the Power 4, and Syracuse came in first, meaning that ESPN thinks that Syracuse football has the easiest schedule in the Power 4 next season. You have an easy schedule. You upgraded the roster clearly. Fran Brown has done an excellent job bringing in some dudes. I can see why he thinks that this could be a sleeper team for next season to make the college football playoff. You have 12 teams, right? You have 12 teams. So it makes a lot of sense. Now, as far as that, those are his 4 points. Now, from my perspective, here's why I think it makes some sense to call them a sleeper. I mentioned the college football playoff having 12 teams. I looked at the poll last year on the AP poll. I looked at that. And I looked at it heading into or after conference championship weekend. I was able to sort it for after that week. And when I looked at it, in order to get into the top 12 by the end of the season, the team needs to win at least 9 games. You need to win at least 9 games in order to be considered for the college football playoff next season, which is going to be 12. You have to win at least 9, probably closer to 10. If I'm being completely honest with you, probably 10. Okay, but 9 to 10 is where you need to be considered for the playoffs. So when I look at Syracuse's schedule, I think there's a pretty solid argument to be had that they're gonna start 4-0 in all likelihood, right? You got Ohio at home. They should win that game, right? Don't have a letdown in week 1. They got Georgia Tech at home, which I said is not an opponent that we should take lightly, but they are at home. They should be able to win that game. Stanford at home should be a win. And then Holy Cross, you're playing all your backups by the second quarter, right? So you should be 4-0. So then it's a matter of, in their final 8 games, can they win 6 of them to be considered for the college football playoff? You got at UNLV, at NC State, at Pitt, Virginia Tech at home, at Boston College, at Cal, UConn, and Miami. Those are the final 8 games of the season. They're probably going to have to win 6 of them to have a chance at making the college football playoff. There's no Clemson or Florida State on the schedule, of course, right? They're not playing against North Carolina with Drake May, so that's not an automatic loss. It's a pretty easy schedule, as ESPN has said. It's an easy schedule. Plain and simple. Now, the flip side to that is that can actually work against Syracuse. It can work against them because that's factored in by the committee. Who you play matters. Not saying it's Syracuse's fault that that's how the ACC schedule was drawn up this season. But if it's between 10-win Syracuse and a 10-win SEC team to get into the college football playoff, that's where it could become a concern. I'm just putting it out there. It can work against you if you have an easy schedule, even if you do meet that win threshold of probably 9 to 10. The safest bet, win the ACC. You get an automatic berth. Don't think they're going to do that, but that's the safest bet. Regardless, there is that path to winning 9 to 10 games next year to at least get into the conversation for the college football playoff. I agree that the offense is looking so much better on paper. You got LaQuinn Allen back, Oronde Gadsden back from injury. Dan Villari is still there, so you have one of the better tight end units in the country. We all like that. And we did go over the receiver room. I already mentioned that. Plus the defense. You were able to retain Marlowe Wax, Justin Barron, Elijah Clark, Jaden Bellamy. Derek McDonald is still there. So you got retained starters. In another year, they should be better. Fran Brown is a defensive head coach, if you want to call him that. Defense first, right? He was a DB coach at Georgia. You brought in Fadil Diggs, Deuce Chestnut, all those other transfers. You're certainly a more experienced team. There's a reason why people are saying that this team could be a sleeper for the college football playoff next season. Once again, Tom Fornelli of CBS Sports called Syracuse a sleeper for the college football playoff, which is going to be 12 teams next season. Now, coming up, I'm going to give you guys the reasonable expectations for Syracuse football, because while I would love for them to make the college football playoff, and I'm rooting for them to do it, heck, I'm rooting for them to win the national championship. How about that? I want this team to win the national championship. Is that a reasonable expectation, though? Like, should we expect Syracuse football to make the playoff? We're going to talk about it right after this. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and on today's show, we're going over Syracuse football being considered by Tom Fornelli of CBS Sports a sleeper for the college football playoff in 2024. He cited 4 reasons for it: upgrade at quarterback, deeper receiver room, Oronde coming back from injury with LaQuinn still being there, and a friendly schedule, and I agree with him on those things. And now it's time to talk about the reasonable expectations for Syracuse football next season. The reasonable ones. Should we expect this team to make the college football playoff in the first year of the Fran Brown era? What do you guys think? Leave a comment below. Do you think that this team should make the playoff in year 1? Well, my answer, no. It is not a reasonable expectation. We should not expect this team to make the playoff this year. Not that it's a bad thing. I'm not saying, hey, it's a reasonable expectation for them to win 4 games. No. It should be a successful season. But to make the college football playoff this year, I see the optimism, and I do agree that it can be a sleeper. But it's not a reasonable expectation for this team to make the college football playoff this season. Since 2000, Syracuse has ranked as high as 12 in the AP polls. Keep in mind, 12 teams make the college football playoff now. They have been ranked 12th on one occasion since 2000. One. This is a team that, for the better part of 2 decades, has not been ranked that high at any point in the polls. A couple years ago, they were ranked as high as 14th, and then they slowly trickled their way out of the top 25. So expecting them to be a top 12 team next season right off the bat to start the Fran Brown era, I would love it. It would be fantastic. But I wouldn't expect it. Of course, that one time where they were ranked as high as 12 was in 2018 when they won 10 games, 9 games in the regular season. All right. Now, I will say this. I do expect Syracuse football to make the college football playoff within the next 3 to 5 seasons. I do expect that. I think that is reasonable within the next 3 to 5. The reasoning for that is not because that it's just not because of the reasoning for it is because, look, it's 12 teams now. It's probably going to expand even further. By 2026, it can be 14, possibly even 16 teams. It's almost going to have that March Madness feel to it, right? You're going to have the same top-end teams. In March Madness, you're always going to have the North Carolinas, the Dukes, the Gonzagas, right? All those top teams. But then outside of really the elite teams that you know are always there, it's basically like seeds. Once you get to seed 5, 6, those teams change every single year. They always change. It's probably going to be a similar feel into college football. You're going to have probably 8 schools around there that will consistently make the college football playoff. These will be your Alabamas, the Georgias, those schools, right? The Ohio States, the Michigans. And you can maybe expand a little bit further into other programs. But there's going to be that similar feel, about 8 teams that we're all going to expect every single year to probably be in it. And then once you expand to 14 to 16, it's possible that even half those spots are going to be year-over-year changeover. You expect that in one of those years, Syracuse football is going to get hot and make the college football playoff. So that's why I think within 3 to 5 years, this team should be able to make the playoff, but not necessarily this season. I would say that for this upcoming year, making a bowl game is the bare minimum. Make a bowl. Bare minimum. And keep in mind that first-year head coaches in recent memory at Syracuse have not done very well in their first seasons. I believe of the last 4 of them, Scott Schaefer is the only one who made a bowl game in year 1. I believe he is the only one who made it. That was it. I'm expecting that Fran Brown breaks that trend and at least at bare minimum makes a bowl game. I would say 7 wins is fine. 8 wins would be good. That's about where I have him. 8 wins. 9 wins and more would be fantastic. I would be very happy if they win 9+ games next season. And I could easily see them being in the conversation for the college football playoff at some point during the year. That would be nice. Like if we're midway through the year and this team is ranked 15th, I think we'd be pretty happy. And as long as they don't have some crazy collapse like they did a few years ago where they started 6-0 and ended up 7-5, I think we'd be pretty happy. So get to maybe 15th. You're in the conversation. Maybe at one point you are ranked 12th or you are ranked 11th. But to expect that they're going to end the year on that they're going to make the college football playoff, I don't think is fair. When it comes to Fran Brown, what he has shown me is he is an elite recruiter, and he's been doing it now at Syracuse. And it's one thing to do it at Georgia, but he's been doing it at Syracuse. But being a head coach is a lot more than just getting the Jimmies and Joes. That's a lot of the battle. Don't get me wrong. I would say that's like 90% of the battle is getting the Jimmies and Joes. But the reason why Miami doesn't win is because Mario Cristobal, while he gets the Jimmies and Joes, he cannot execute the X's and O's. And so Fran Brown, as a first-year head coach, can he execute the X's and O's it's going to take to make the college football playoff in year one? In year one. Think about it. Think about what he has to learn. First of all, he's got to keep the team disciplined. I'm pretty confident they're going to be more disciplined than what they were under Dino Babers when they took penalty after penalty after penalty. Pretty confident he can do that, right? But it's also having the team prepared for situations, situational awareness, right? That matters. Knowing when to use timeouts, knowing how to manage the clock. That is my biggest bugaboo, my biggest gripe with coaches. I'm convinced that that coaches need to just play a game of Madden and learn how to manage a clock. There are so many coaches who just don't know how to do it. Some of them are some of the greatest coaches ever. Remember, Andy Reid in Kansas City? He used to not know how to manage a clock. He's started to figure out, and he's winning Super Bowls now with Kansas City. That was his big bugaboo. Managing a clock. Is he going to be able to be prepared for that? You have to learn that. You don't have that responsibility as defensive backs coach in Georgia, but you're the head coach now. It's not necessarily about calling plays. Calling plays, whatever. Fran Brown, situational awareness, team discipline, knowing when to call timeouts, knowing when to gamble. When is it appropriate to go for it on fourth down? When should you settle for the field goal? When should you punt? These are all things you're going to learn with experience. And Fran Brown has never been a head coach. These are things that Fran Brown is going to have to learn in year one. There's a learning curve to it. That's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. 7 to 8 wins, I think we'd be pretty happy. Maybe you win the bowl game this time. That would be nice. I'd be pretty happy with that. Now, I also will say this. I mentioned this to a buddy of mine. He went to the University of Florida, recently graduated. The Florida coach is on the hot seat. If Florida doesn't win this year, he's getting fired. I'm not suggesting this per se, but here's what I'm saying. If for whatever reason, if Syracuse does make the college football playoff, if they do, and they win 10 games, I could see Fran Brown leaving. Now, it's a trade I think we'd all take. It's a trade we take. But Fran Brown wins 10 games at Syracuse in his first season. He's going to be a hot candidate for those jobs that could open up, like a University of Florida that could open up, or really any SEC Big Ten school that's prominent. I'm just saying. I know you don't want to believe me on it. An example I have for you is Luke Fickell at Cincinnati going over to Wisconsin last season. I'm not suggesting Fran Brown's going to leave. And I think we'd all take the trade. But if he wins 10 plus games in year one, I'd wish him the best of luck, of course, but I would not be surprised if he's not the coach of Syracuse in 2025. That's all I'm saying about that. All right? I do believe that if everything breaks their way this season, I genuinely believe this. If everything breaks their way, they can make the college football playoff. I genuinely think that. All right? But how often in sports does everything break your team's way? You get the right injury luck. You get all the bounces during your games. You're telling me that this team is going to be perfect, basically, to make the college football playoff, to win 10 plus games in the regular season. You have to basically be perfect. That's how I see them making the playoff. I guess it's possible, but I believe 8 wins, we should be pretty happy with it. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Day now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Welcome back, everyone, into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and we're going over on today's show. Syracuse football is a sleeper candidate to make the college football playoff. I just told you guys the reasonable expectations for them. I think personally, they win 8 games. I think we'd be pretty happy. 8 games would be solid. That's where I have them at. But leave a comment below. What are your reasonable expectations for Syracuse football in 2024? Now, as far as what's coming up on the podcast, tomorrow is, of course, Poll Friday. Who's the best player on Syracuse football right now? I gave you guys 4 choices. Kyle McCord, Fadil Diggs, Oronde Gadsden, and other, if you believe it's not one of those 3. But personally, I think it's got to be one of those 3. So another football episode coming tomorrow. That is it for today's podcast. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications so you know right away when I'm dropping the next podcast. And let's hope that Syracuse football does in fact make the college football playoff in 2024.